Welcome to the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. I'm your host, Yaakov Katz. For 843 days, Israel lived with an open wound. It was that long that the body of Ran Gvili, the heroic policeman who was killed while valiantly fighting to save the lives of partygoers fleeing the Nova Music Festival from Hamas terrorists, had been held in the Gaza Strip. It was for that many days that Israelis' hearts remained pierced, unable to heal or move on. But for Israel, his body's return this week, is not just an operational milestone. It is the end of something that actually began in 2014, when Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul's bodies were taken by Hamas during Operation Protective Edge. For about 12 years almost, Israel's military and intelligence agencies have operated with one overriding mission: to bring every hostage home from Gaza. And we have. And the return of Gvili underscores one of Israel's most deeply held values, that no one is ever abandoned, not on the battlefield, not in captivity, not even in death. It is an ethos that goes beyond slogans and is an unwritten agreement between the state and its citizens, between the country and those who defend it. On today's podcast, I'm speaking with two of my JPPI colleagues, Gil Troy and Sara Hirschhorn, to unpack what the significance and the return of Ran Gvili's body to Israel for burial means for the end of this chapter of the war, for the continued move to phase 2 of the reconstruction and rehabilitation of Gaza. Where does this all go? What does Donald Trump have up his sleeve to be able to disarm Hamas and get them to disband? And what does this mean for the continued standoff in Israel when it comes to the political future? Will there be a commission of inquiry? What we'll look into? And what was this week like for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who continues to fight and hold on ahead of an election that will be held sometime in the next 8-9 months? Stay with us. Gil and Sara, it's great to have you both back on the podcast. And, planning for this was a bit complicated because just so much happened. So much is happening all the time. Will there be another round with Iran? Is the government about to fall? But I really want to start with, I think, what to me, to some extent, is probably the most important news of the week. And that is the return of the body of Ran Gvili to Israel for burial. Really, as more details come out from the operation that the IDF undertook to find him and to identify his body, right? Let's remember 2 years and a quarter after he was killed on October 7th, fighting to defend the Israelis who had gone to the Nova Festival, and really was a hero in what he did at the Sad Junction and Alumim and in the kibbutzim around the south. But his body was taken. I mean, so, anyone with I have no scientific background, but almost 2.5 years later, not much that you're just going to look at a body and be able to say, oh, this was Ran. And you see the reports coming out of just like the amount of dentists, for example, who were involved in this, like a dozen or so, and the teeth. That was the critical point to be able to identify, and having an X-ray out in the field, and they exhumed up close to like 200 bodies and finally got to his, is just unbelievable, and is the closure of a chapter. I feel to some extent gives us the opportunity to heal, or to begin to heal, because we wouldn't have been able to as long as someone was being held in Gaza. But really a moment when you think about it, since 2014, we have had whether a living hostage or a dead hostage, but we've had a body of an Israeli security person, when there was a soldier, now it was a policeman, being held in the Gaza Strip since 2014. I mean, it's remarkable, and now there's nothing like that. So, I'd love to kind of just get both of your thoughts on this, and what this moment kind of means for us as a nation, for us as a country. And then also we can talk about where we go from here. But Gil, why don't you start?
I'm going to speak American, if I may. I remember my first trip to Washington, D.C. when I was 12 years old. And I remember the White House. I remember the Washington Monument. But I also remember the tomb of the monument to the unknown soldier, the tomb of the unknown soldier. And I remember that monument to heroism, to sacrifice, but also to the sheer brutality of war and to understanding that you can't always bring everybody home. I really don't believe, and we've been on this podcast and you've done an amazing job, Yaakov, shepherding us through this conversation since just days after October 7th. Back then, one of us believed that we would get as many hostages, live hostages, home as we have. And we certainly didn't believe that we would get all 251, 253. It's funny, people still use different numbers. And we didn't believe that we'd be in a situation where we wouldn't have any hostages left after 12 years. So I think it's important to stop and, first of all, acknowledge the sheer grit, resilience of the country, of our soldiers. I want to hug every one of those soldiers who had to go through 200 or 250 corpses. The sheer intensity of the operation shows something about the culture of Israel, the power of Israel. And I also want to say that it shows a remarkable power. You know, the left is going to tell their story about how if we didn't have the hostage movement, it wouldn't have happened. And the right is going to tell their story of praise Bibi. But I think we historians have to say, you know, there's kind of like a scissors effect, that sometimes having the tensions from both sides yields a result that few people could have had the nerve to predict in October 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. So I think it's a moment to kind of take a step back, now acknowledge also the brutality of that strategy, but also take real pride in Israel's collective effort, in the cultural power, in the political power, and yes, in the sheer military might that we exerted to get to this moment, and to say, well, there's a lot more work to do. We've won.
And this ethos, to some extent also, of which sounds like a slogan and sounds like it's out of a movie, never leave a man behind, but really making it real and standing up for that at a time of such polarization and such politicization and so much division within the country and around the world. And of course, you're never, look, Rona Rod is an open wound that still decades later, we don't know what happened to him, 40 years now. There's Guy Hever, whose body just the other day, right, a soldier who went missing in the north back in the 90s, I think it was. They still don't know where, what's happened to him. They arrested some people the other day. There's always going to be these mysteries that will continue, but really here in this case, it's the ethos that I think the Israeli military has long stood by and the Israeli people have long stood by. What do you think, Sara?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, as someone who's a new immigrant to Israel, even though, Gil referenced the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, certainly, they're still bringing back bodies from Vietnam or even World War II in the United States. I think it is less deeply embedded in the ethos of American culture than it is in Israeli culture that you truly leave no one behind. And I have to say, I also was surprised, like Gil, that there was such success, really, even in bringing home the live hostages, who I really feared would die there, as much as those who unfortunately had fallen and had been there. I also really was surprised that Israel managed to extract the intelligence and I suppose whatever concessions were necessary in order to excavate the body of Ran Gvili and to be able to actually return him home. I had really thought that this was going to, that Ron was going to become the new Hadar Golden, that open wound of Israeli society that would remain, festering for the next 10 years, 15 years and onward. And it seemed to me that certainly it would have been Hamas's strategy and probably preference to allow that to happen. But somehow all of those challenges were overcome in order to bring him home. So for that, I think we should be extremely grateful.
I mean, I said, just myself, I can attest to numerous times throughout this war that we will never get back all the bodies, that some of them will have to be lost, that it's impossible. I mean, the destruction, the devastation, the shifting of the ground, the movement, someone will be in a tunnel. I mean, it's really, I think we really have to understand and just take a moment and look at the satellite footage of Gaza today and say for a second, how did we get back every single hostage, those who were alive and those who were not alive? And this is not just a little thing. This is huge. And I think, like you said, Gil, none of us would have believed back then that this is possible. And this is I think it's to the credit of the IDF and the intelligence agencies, first and foremost, for being able to locate and discover and find and know kind of where that thread was to pull at it to find these people, but also to the Prime Minister and to Ron Dermer, who's no longer in his job, but he was someone who was tasked with making, with being in charge of the hostages and got them back ultimately, and to the Americans, of course. And my question to you guys now, and Gil, is, and maybe we'll give people little insights into the internal JPPI workings, but we have a WhatsApp group, and in this WhatsApp group, we have internal discussions. And you two, Gil and Sara, have been at odds a bit on some of the issues. And so maybe we'll just bring that out a bit. Is, now that this is over, where are we? Where do we go? And is this the end of the war? And have we won?
So first of all, I want to point out that we do it lovingly and respectfully, which is one of the reasons why I like being part of the JPPI.
Airing all of our dirty laundry, Yaakov.
No, and it's actually it's important to emphasize, because it's something that's missing in so many organizations these days. It's missing in so many conversations these days. It's missing in so many families these days. And so part of the JPPI ethos is having people from the left, from the right, religious, non-religious, and because it really is the Jewish People Policy Institute, and you can't figure out policy for the Jewish people without that big broad tent. I also want to add one more word to our previous conversation, which is Zionism, because I think it's a Zionist ethos to bring everybody home. And it's a Zionist ethos to try to bring a certain sense of humanity in the war, no matter how brutal it is. And it's a Zionist ethos to see, as the soldiers finished their horrific work that was so noble and so wonderful, to have them sing both the national anthem, Hatikva, and to sing the song that was sung in the concentration camps, Anim Amin, I believe. And it wasn't a religious moment. They were using, some were using religious language, some were using national language, but they were using Zionist language, Israeli language, to really kind of pull that together. And I think the reason why I override all my historian's instincts, because we're supposed to take 10, 20, 30 years and decide who won. And we know that sometimes what looks like a victory the day after the war can turn into a loss or a disaster 30, 40, 50 years later. The reason why I keep on emphasizing we won is because I think that that both the Jewish world and Israel is deeply demoralized at this moment. And I don't think we've appreciated the high price we paid to have such amazing achievements. And I think it's also important for our PR strategy to look to the Americans and look to the rest of the world and say, look, we have paid an incredibly high price, but look where we were on October 6th, not just October 7th. Look at the delusions we were under. Look at the threats we were under. Look at how strong Iran seemed to be. Look at how invincible Hezbollah seemed to be. Look what then Hamas did to us. Given all that, and given, again, as an American historian, 9 years in Iraq, a draw at best. 20 years in Afghanistan, Taliban is back. Given that in 2+ years that we got all the hostages back, and every loss, of course, tears my heart, but that the American military was saying that we would lose 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 men and women in order to achieve what we've now achieved. And we did it with the loss of an extra 600 soldiers. Again, I hate throwing these numbers around, but we've defied the military expectations. I think that for all the challenges, we also kept our moral compass quite clear. It doesn't mean there weren't mistakes, but so on the whole, I'm incredibly proud, and I think we should be proud. And that's why I think even while there's still work ahead, we should stop, take a second, raise a glass, and say, L'chaim, we won.
Sara, there is some noise that's playing in your background.
My neighbors are doing shibbutzim across the building. It could be that, but I don't think there's anything in the room anymore.
That's what it must be. Okay. Let me mark this.
Sorry.
So, Sara, you take a different approach to this, though, right? One that doesn't call for the l'chaim, doesn't say break out the bottle of champagne or rosé yet. Explain your position on this.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is just a dispositional difference between myself and Gil. I think Gil is always a wonderfully optimistic and, forward-looking person. And I am a little bit more of a Cassandra by nature, and I think that's part of where our division lies. And I mean, I agree with Gil that certainly today, as the Israeli phrase goes, the closing of the circle is a time to open that bottle of champagne. I mean, the incredible achievements that have taken place, and getting all the hostages back is certainly not a small one. So I think we have to remember that as a aim of the war, that was an important achievement. Could it have happened differently? What did it actually happen because of military pressure? These are issues that historians will debate, for centuries, but certainly they are all home, or as many of them are home as possible, and that is not something small. But I think my feeling on the day that Ran Gvili is being buried is why is he being buried today? What are the mistakes that happened on October 6th that led to this moment? And I think many of them remain. First and foremost, that it seems to me after 2.5 years, Hamas is still standing, and that was the primary goal of the war, was to disband, disarm, and destroy Hamas, and that fundamentally did not happen. It was Israeli hubris to think that a total victory of that nature was possible. But if that was the stated war goal, and that was the reason that, over 600 soldiers were killed and many will be injured for lives, and their families, also impacted, I don't know that we could say that this, that this suffering was worth it. Secondly, I know Yaakov could say a lot more about this because he's written a whole book about it recently. I'm not sure that the fundamental conceptia behind October 6th or behind October 7th has been broken, or that the mistakes that were made in that moment have been addressed. We have no commission of inquiry, or at the moment, an impartial and rigorous one seems like the kind of justice that the families of hostages and fallen soldiers will never get. And without that, it's hard to say that that we are in a better position, not just militarily and tactically, but I think intellectually and strategically, preparing for what is the inevitable next October 7th. If there's a Hamas that is still standing, and one that has vowed to commit a new October 7th every day that ends in Y, how are we really in a different place than we were before? The last thing I would say is that Israeli society needs to make a decision about whether it wants to move forward or not. The burial of Ran Gvili, I think, just brings us back to October 6, 2023, which was not necessarily a particularly happy, romantic moment in Israel, even though we now look at it through rose-colored glasses. We were, in the depths of the divisions of the judicial reform, same polarization over questions that remain, the budget, the Haredim, social tensions of
none of that has gone away.
None of that has gone away, and we have to make an active choice whether we're going back to that moment as well. Is Israeli society going to choose consensus? And I don't know.
I agree with both of you to an extent, right? I'll be the middleman, but I part of me also feels, okay, this is obviously a big moment, right? Which I think we all agree. And the question is, what comes next? And I think, Sarah, you are also right that a lot of the conceptia, or the paradigm and the way of looking at things, hasn't dramatically shifted, despite all the big, tough talk that we've heard from our politicians over the last 2 years and a bit of the decisive victory or the complete total victory, or whatever it is, and how Hamas won't be standing. And the facts are that it is. And despite that, we're not renewing hostilities, and we're opening up the Rafah crossing, and we're letting in hundreds of truckloads a day. And we're being held back by the Americans once again. And Netanyahu can hold a press conference like he did on Tuesday night and claim that it was the Biden arms embargo that blocked, or that caused the death of soldiers, which I kind of have a problem with, because I don't think that it was Israel needed every 1-ton bomb, and that's why soldiers were necessarily getting killed. But it's also difficult to say something like that about a guy who did help pass $14 billion of aid for Israel during the war, helped secure at least 2 ceasefires that brought home lots of the hostages. I mean, obviously there are details that we could all argue over, but it's the deflection once again. It's placing the blame on someone else once again. It's the same tactics that we've been in just for such a long time. And it's just like, okay, so what really has changed? And I think that here, and this is the question I wonder about, is, okay, so what's next? And we kind of know what's next, because what we've done to an extent is outsourced the decision-making to the Trump administration. And the Trump administration is basically said, phase 2 is moving ahead. This was already before, right? Last week at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, Trump rolled out the Board of Peace, the Executive Committee on Gaza, et cetera. That's moving. The decision was made to move to phase 2. The announcement was made that Rafah's opening. Israel immediately said, no, it's not opening, but it actually is opening. Thank God we found Ran Gvili's body now, because that would have been a big problem for Netanyahu had his body still being held in Gaza when Rafah's now, as we speak, apparently being opened. So my question is, I mean, and this is what it's going to come down to. Do we have, Trump did a good job here to some extent, I think, right? Got back the living hostages, ended the war. We got back the dead hostages. All their bodies were repatriated. What happens now? And, you know, Hamas is not disarmed. Hamas is a force with tens of thousands of people. Hamas is in control of 50% of the territory, is confiscating goods, is making money on taxes on those goods that are being brought into Gaza. Do we trust Trump that he can get Hamas to disarm? What do you think, Gil?
Back in October 2023, when I was on this podcast, I was very careful to say that we have to be wary about overpromising in terms of our war goals. And I pointed out then, and I still point out, that it took the United States of America 10 years to find Osama bin Laden. It's not language of we're going to eliminate a movement, we're going to eliminate an idea is immature and not realistic. I said it then and I believe it now. So I completely agree with a lot of what both of you said, which is that there's a lot of work to do because people don't like the phrase, but we're a villa in the jungle. We are surrounded by really, really bad people. We're surrounded by people who celebrated October 7th. We're people who even if hostages had escaped, they all report that they could figure out how to escape, but they couldn't figure out how to get past the waves and waves of hostile Gazans. And so we have people around us who don't want us to exist. And it goes to 1,000 miles away to the Iranian regime as well. Given that, I have to, as we say in the university world, grade on a curve. And I have to say, A, are we safer today than we were October 6th? And I say absolutely. Partially because we broke out of that conceptia. And I agree, it's appalling that we haven't stepped back and said, okay, when are we going to learn from this? When are we going to have a top-notch commission? And the politics around that is so disrespectful. You're absolutely right, Sarah, to the soldiers who died and to the soldiers who lost limbs and to the hostages and to our kids who's just sacrificed sheer mental health and days of their lives. So I'm not unaware of the problems, but I have to do a kind of assessment. And I look around. We talk about the Seven Front War. We talk about where is Iran today and where it was then? Where is Hezbollah today? Where it was then? Where is Hamas today? Where it was then? And again, the word I kept on using was degrading. We have to degrade their military power. And what we've seen is two things. One is our awareness is so much greater. And two, and this is really politically incorrect, and people don't like when I say it. I'm supposed to say, oh, we've restored deterrence. No. We are living in these beautiful homes in Jerusalem, and you can see out the backyard the trees behind me, because there is a balance of terror in our favor in the Middle East. When we don't fear them, and we didn't on October 6th to a certain extent, and we didn't on October 8th, we lose. When they fear us, we're okay. And we had to kind of do really, really hard things in this war because war is brutal, war is hell. And so I think we have restored that balance of terror. Does that mean that there won't be more attempts to kidnap soldiers? Of course not. And innocents, does that mean there won't be more incursions? Of course not. But given where we've been and given what we've done, and partially because I want us to take a victory lap together, left and right, working together, saying, oh, you know, the diplomatists were right and the military types were right. The Netanyahu-Dermer wing was right, and some of the people in Hostage Square were right, although I still believe they should have protested outside the country, not inside the country. So I think we have to kind of breathe, applaud the good as a way of trying to leverage that to do what you are absolutely right, what we need to do, which is create a new conversation in the society with a new kind of politics, a new kind of leadership, and a new kind of consensus.
But let me push back, though. But practically speaking, you have a force that has shown no intention to disarm. There's no one who's going to go in there and do it physically, right? Except for maybe the IDF, which at the moment doesn't have the green light from Donald Trump. And I don't think has there's much of an appetite within general Israeli society for that either to take place. You have, on the other hand, moving very fast forward right now, this Board of Peace and the Executive Committee and the reconstruction, the rehabilitation, and much more. I don't know how it happens. So part of me is I don't know how it happens, but part of me is also, but I didn't know that 20 people are going to walk out of Gaza in October and be alive. And I didn't know that Ran Gvili's body was going to come back. And, maybe there is something to be said. And Donald Trump was right all along that you can't talk to Hamas, but you can talk to the Qataris and the Turks. And Israel, which is legitimately opposed to an active Qatari and Turkish role in any of this, for the support that they have of the Muslim Brotherhood, for the sanctuary that they've given Hamas, for the anti-Semitism that comes out of Ankara, and so much more, also might need to realize that Donald Trump is right. And that the path to Gaza and the path to Hamas does run through Doha and Ankara. And he so far has delivered, because if we're true to ourselves for a moment, probably a lot of us didn't believe that Hamas would just willingly give up their best insurance card, which was the hostages. So, Sara, do you think that Trump has some ace up his sleeve, that he can make this happen? And do you think that he's got the bandwidth to keep going at it and to keep pushing?
Oh, I mean, I think if we want to be optimistic, we should say yes and see what he and his team and this new Board of Peace, which I don't quite understand, can deliver. But I think realistically, what Israel needs to do now is harden its own target, and that again requires breaking the conceptia that we had on October 6th. If you want to rely on Doha and Turkey, that's a decision, but you can't have your aides being taking suitcases full of cash from them at the same time. You need to have some independent abilities, and I think that means ensuring that the border is more secure than it was. Understanding what that yellow line is going to mean and how long Israeli soldiers are going to be there. I mean, because I think if the yellow line was removed and Israel withdrew today, Hamas would be in charge of 100% of Gaza. That's sure. That's the only obstacle. So we have to kind of understand what's going on here and be realistic about it and understand what Israel can do, I think, to withdraw its best as can to its own border and return to an October 6th reality where Hamas has the motive to exterminate as many Jews as possible, and I mean Jews and not just and Israelis. It has, to some extent, it still has the means or is rebuilding the means. So the only question is will it have the opportunity? And that's where Israel needs to ensure that can't happen again. But I think it's a strategy to be optimistic, but also to take your own precautions.
There's another player here. His name is Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's pretty dominant in Israel, if you haven't heard. But
never heard of the guy. Who are you talking about?
I've long been a big proponent and advocate. I've written, I've spoken, I wrote a book about October 7th. But the basic that we need a commission of inquiry, that it's existential for the state of Israel. I still genuinely believe that. But I also I feel like I've lost a bit of faith in the commission of inquiry this week, after a commission of inquiry published its report on Sunday. This is the one into the submarine affair, as it's called, and basically in black and white wrote that Netanyahu, Yossi Cohen, who was then his head of National Security Council, later the head of the Mossad, and just others, endangered the security of the state of Israel in the way that they managed the procurement of huge military weaponry and assets, in this case, naval vessels and submarines, and the way that they gave permission to the Germans to sell to Egypt because Germany sold us, but they needed our permission to sell the Egyptians, and how there was never a discussion, how the cabinet was never consulted, how the whole structure is broken, how information is held back and is not disclosed to members of the security cabinet, how there's no functioning mechanism. Now you look at that and you say, okay, but that has to do with submarines. Why do I care? Well, you care, I think, because if you look at how October 7th came to be, you kind of understand that these are similar problems and similar mistakes. Information that is compartmentalized, conversations that aren't being had in the right forum, people who are not being told what's really happening, information that's being held back, military intelligence officers who want to come meet and brief ministers and want to tell the prime minister and meet with him, and him saying, I'm not going to meet with you and I don't want to hear you. And then you even look at what's going on right now, and you look at the cabinet and how they deal with the very micro tactic of issues, right? Like who's going to go through Rafah crossing? How many people are going to go through Rafah crossing? What exactly is going to go through Rafah crossing? That should be dealt with by professionals. Talk to me about the policy, the vision, where are we going? What's the plan? And that the cabinet, you talk to cabinet members, they don't talk about that stuff, right? So I'm deeply concerned, and I'll tell you why I'm concerned, is A, because look, the problems keep repeating themselves, but B, no one cares. This happened on Sunday. We barely remember. It's nowhere to be found, right? No one's talking about it. It's a commission of inquiry, state appointed, led by Usher Grunis, the former Supreme Court president. I mean, the way it's supposed to be, no one cares. It does nothing. And therefore, I think that maybe we have to fix things, and a commission of inquiry is needed to fix things 100%. The internal, the reforms, intelligence, how, whatever, all that stuff, structure. But really at the top, no one cares. So any commission of inquiry that will come out, it'll be looked at again through that sick, disturbing, I'm fed up with it prism of yes, Bibi, no Bibi. And it's time to throw that out the window, because this is really screwing up with this country. But your thoughts, Gil, on kind of unpacking that, and can we, in this moment, find a way to look and do that introspection and hold those accountable, while knowing that politically, pardon my French, I don't usually, use 4-letter words on this podcast, but no one will give a shit at the end to whatever that report will come out and say.
Back when progressives were progressives at the turn of the century America, they introduced concepts like accountability and good governance. And in the United States of America, there is, although it doesn't always achieve its aims, and certainly in the Trump administration with the sledgehammer president, it doesn't quite work. But there is an ongoing conversation in America about good governance, about accountability, about systems. Unfortunately, in Israel, the reactive nature of our politics, the existential nature of the threats, leads us to have much more of a kind of, and the kind of, we'll figure it out nature of our culture, leads us to have a much more kind of jumpy approach to politics and to personalities. And we don't have that kind of systematic basis. And so on one level, you're absolutely right. The submarine scandal, and this goes back, years ago. Some people were yelling about it, and it was barely heard in the din of all kinds of other things. It's never gotten traction, right? And I think, wow, I mean, this is we have a look at how national security issues are not done properly, or not taken. So it actually, you're right to make a connection between that and the October 7th conceptio. So on the one hand, I agree with you that if anybody thinks that a commission of inquiry is going to lead to a kind of, again, lowercase p, old-fashioned American progressive movement in America, which is going to bring good governance and accountability to the forefront, I'm not going to predict that. But there is an emotional need on the part of so many of us for a commission of inquiry, which is made of the finest men and women of our country, jurists, leaders, politicians, experts. And we need to, in the same way that after October 73, after that disaster, which ultimately led to a victory, but it took us years and decades before we could even say Yom Kippur and victory. But the major Arab armies, Syria, Egypt, never dared to take us on again. So in the same way that I can't tell you, and I've looked into this at various points in my career, but I can't recall the exact good governance recommendations that they had from the October 7th Commission of Inquiry. But the Commission of Inquiry gave people a feeling of, oh, we've been heard, here's a narrative, here's an explanation. And now, by the way, some people think that, for example, Dadu Elazar, the chief of staff, was unfairly thrown under the bus because of the cult of Moshe Dayan. So people now actually need a Commission of Inquiry about the Commission of Inquiry.
When I look at this past week, to me, it's, without doubt, it's a good week for Bibi, right? Commission of Inquiry comes out, doesn't even, people don't even take a look. They yawn and move on. We're still, Ran Gvili's body comes back. Big end of kind of that chapter, end of that saga. And we're still all hyper-focused on Iran. When are they attacking? Are they attacking? How are they going to attack? Where will they attack? Will we be stuck overseas? Will we not? We'll be able to try. I mean, everybody's still on that. Every day, I'm guessing you guys and we're all being asked, do you think it's going to happen? Do you not think it's going to happen? I said to people, if you know how to get into Donald Trump's head, the orange head, then you'll be able to figure it out. But otherwise, no one really knows. Like all these, I read these articles written by all the military reporters, all my friends, and this assessment, it means nothing. They know nothing. It's all Donald Trump. I mean, Sara, to wrap us up, I'm thinking of Netanyahu. I'm thinking of his challenges that he does have politically. But when we look just at the field at the moment, he's riding high.
Yeah, he's riding high. First of all, I think also just to return to what Gil was saying for a moment, I think maybe in addition to a commission of inquiry, which to me really investigates the political intelligence, military failures of October 7th, what I think Gil is also hinting to is we need a kind of truth and reconciliation commission here in Israel. Now, I'm not sure that any of those processes, which I've studied in other parts of the world, have ever, really led to truth or reconciliation. In many ways, they have salted the wounds of many countries and have been to their detriment. But I think that's essentially what we're also talking about, is that we need that as a nation. But Netanyahu doesn't need that. What Netanyahu, I think, needs right now is another war. And that's, part of what is happening with the momentum towards Iran. And I sit here every day. It's not doing good things for my central nervous system. I'm sitting here every day with my little bomb shelter bag next to the door, wondering when it's going to happen. And it seems to me that, Netanyahu's strategy is always, all right, that war didn't go so well. Let me start a new one, or let me get involved in a new one that will, once again restore my title as Mr. Security and generally burnish my image as a leader of the state of Israel. And that's what I'm a little worried may be happening here. Of course, we don't know how to get into Trump's head, and that is the more worrisome element. At least Bibi, in some cases, is kind of predictable and generally a small C conservative in many ways. That he is not always necessarily the first to jump into major conflict, but it seems to me that Bibi is doing well, and if he has another war, he'll be doing even better, because one of the things that I think we can say, which is where Gil started this conversation, is we look regionally and look at the 7-front war, and many of those other fronts, in fact, are doing better than Gaza. And that, of course, is what Netanyahu's legacy will likely be. And if there is a strike with Iran that is a game changer for Israel and for the world, really, and most importantly for the Iranian people, that once again will be part of this larger legacy. But right now, Netanyahu is holding cards close to his vest, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, this is again, the seesaw that Israel finds itself on. Right, we have good days, we have bad days, we have interesting days. But we have lots of days, and what comes will be no less, I think, dramatic in what's ahead on any of these different fronts. So let me just thank both Dr. Sara Hirschhorn and Professor Gil Troy. Thank you both very much for joining me, and to all our viewers and listeners, thanks for joining us once again for another Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. As always, you can find us where podcasts can be found on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, website of Times of Israel, and we'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, have a great weekend, a Shabbat Shalom, and prayers for everyone's safety and a little bit of quiet. Thank you very much.